Hi, I'm Scott Simpson.
And I'm Charla Stever.
And we are Thai learning specialists. And we're glad you're joining us today. We're going to talk about culturally responsive practices in schools, in classrooms, and specifically in conjunction with essential understandings written by indigenous elders in our state and in some of the states around us as well. What are those essential understandings called, Charla?
They're the Oceti Sakowin essential understandings, and they were adopted in our state in around 2011 and have been used in schools and beyond schools sometimes in communities to learn about and from the elders that are from the 9 nations in South Dakota. And it's been really a wonderful resource for individuals and schools and teachers and students to use. So,
and really terrific learning for us as well, because you may be wondering, why are these two folks doing this? Mm-hmm. And like we said before, we're learning specialists. And several years ago, elders in our state said, hey, we have these wonderful essential understandings, but we're concerned that that teachers won't know how to use them, or maybe won't prioritize them the way we hope that they will prioritize them, and so they worked with us and asked us to kind of be not culture experts, but people who help the culture experts come into their place in classrooms. You know, the elders are the ones who know the culture. Mm-hmm. Teachers are the ones responsible for teaching things like science and English and math and everything else, but making that happen in a really good way where those cultural pieces come in to the classroom, into the curriculum, into the lessons in a way that's appropriate and that makes sense. That's kind of what we've been working on doing for these last 8 years.
Right. Our expertise is really around learning and creating opportunities for students to learn from and with those elders again, and through the resources created on this. We store everything on the Wolakota website, and we'll share that with you after a bit. But it's really about integrating in a way that is it is seamless. It doesn't create another thing we have to do in our classrooms, but rather that it integrates it into the lessons in a way where all students, we hope, are having opportunities to see themselves in the day at school as they see examples of people giving wisdom, expertise, or whatever it is, that they can see that from elders from their own communities as well.
Sometimes in the past, well-intentioned projects have kind of, they kind of take the add-on kind of approach where we're doing school and we know what doing school looks like, and then we feel like we ought to put in some cultural stuff, so we'll have a special day, or we'll have a special hour, or we'll have a special focus for a week or something like that. And that's not bad. But the problem is it's not integrated. It's like something extra, something additional, something outside of the main thing. And unfortunately, what it communicates is there's real learning, and then there's this other cultural stuff that we do sometimes because we think we ought to. Really, what we're going to share with you today is, like Charla said, a holistic approach where when we do it this way, not only are we serving all of our learners in a better way and helping learning to happen, but we're also actually, I think, doing a better job with our content standards and doing a great job with the essential understandings that have been adopted by our state. You know, our state has said every school needs to be incorporating these. So,
one thing that we occasionally will hear from individuals is, why do we have these essential understandings? Why do we have the Oceti Sakowin essential understandings and not Norwegian essential understandings or German essential understandings or whatever it happens to be? Part of the reason that we have the Oceti Sakowin essential understandings and not things like Norwegian essential understandings or German is because the people who lived here longest are the people of the Oceti Sakowin. And it's really important that we have a strong understanding, and that's something that's been lacking in our education system for quite some time. It's important that we have that understanding of who these people are and learn from them and with them whenever we can, and knowing that they are still a very big part of our state, have been here long before we were a state. And so to ignore that, we really would be missing out in our educational system, to not have that piece. I know when I grew up here in South Dakota as well, but boy, there wasn't anything in our subject matter around learning about the people who've been here longest.
Either that, or it came from a non-indigenous perspective.
Right.
You know, you hear from a white scholar who may know some things, but you're not hearing the perspective of the indigenous people. And I think that's the other piece of this. We live here in this beautiful land, and to know ourselves, to know who I am living here in South Dakota. I need to dig deeply into what's indigenous here, whether we're talking about the land itself or the people who have been here, who are indigenous to this place. That's where that kind of wisdom and understanding really resides. So we're excited to get into this, and what we'll do is want to show you kind of a graphic that'll give you kind of a holistic view of what we're going to touch on. There are three pieces of this. And this is something that's developed over time. It's not something that we set out and said, okay, here's the model we're going to use, and then we'll follow it. This is something that over the 8 or 9 years that we've been doing this, we've realized there are some good ways of doing this, and then there are some much better ways of doing this. And hopefully we're better at it now than we were at the beginning. But there are three parts to this, and the first part that we're really going to go in depth into is culturally responsive practice, and we're going to dig into some things that come out of research and what we know to be true in learning spaces with culturally diverse students, culturally diverse learners. Then we're going to talk specifically in the unity section. We're going to talk about the essential understandings, the Oceti Sakowin essential understandings here in our state. And then in the diversity section, we're going to talk about the importance of actually seeing and hearing elders, indigenous elders talk, and how those three things fit together to help us in any grade level, any content, to make lessons that are culturally responsive and also good for our learners and for the content that we're trying to address. So we'll go ahead and get started with this culturally responsive practices piece. And the research tells us that there are three elements to culturally responsive practices. And one of them is institutional. And that's really, do we have the support we need at the state level, at the district level, in the school? And that's incredibly important. I think the second two are the ones we're going to focus on, though, because in a real practical sense, until we begin to address as on the educator level, on the teacher level, and on the instructional level, what it is we need to do, that's when we become clear about, hey, this thing that we have in our school is kind of in the way. Can we change that? Can we make an adjustment to that?
I wanted to share, too, that really at that institutional level, although we're not going to address that today, in South Dakota, I would say that is in a good place at the state level. At the highest level, our Department of Education has, and the Department of Tribal Relations as well, work together in partnership to try to make sure that everything is in place from a state level, and the guidance and the investing in resources that can help teachers to bring this into their classrooms.
The very fact that we have essential understandings in our state, and that they have been adopted, and it's been put out there that we need to be incorporating these into all of our schools, not just schools that have a high Native population, but all of our schools. That's a big piece of institutional support. But on the personal level and on the instructional level, we're really talking about individual teachers. Where am I at? What do I need to address for myself? That includes things like personal biases that maybe I'm not aware of, my narrowness of view because I'm coming from a particular perspective, and I'm sometimes not aware of some of those other perspectives. And then once that's in place, then really looking at what do we do instructionally? Are there adjustments we need to make to our curriculum, to the way we're teaching, even the way we design our classrooms and engage with our students? So all three of these are really important. And probably in today's training, we're going to talk really about 2 and 3. But hopefully, as you become more deeply embedded into that, you'll begin to say, hey, you know what, there's something structurally that's going on at my school or at my district that, maybe we could adjust that a little bit and we work together to make things flow. We're going to include a link to the larger article that includes the research that this is coming out of. But if you're on the Prezi, you're following that, we'll include the link to that as well. The Prezi has a link there that goes directly to that article as well. And that's some work that was done in Canada. So what we're going to look at is the mindset of culturally responsive educators. And this set of 6 characteristics are really, they're not really something you'd master. I think they're a list of 6 things that you can continually, as an educator, come back to remind yourself, where am I at in response to this? What am I doing in this? What do I have some areas to grow in this?
And I think, too, it's really about awareness.
Yeah.
Making sure that I, as an educator, am aware of these things. I know I may not do them perfectly all the time, but that at least it's on my radar, and I'm remembering that I need to make sure I'm doing some of these things. And this is a beginning point.
Yeah. I think the idea of doing things perfectly is sometimes a problem, especially when it comes to these matters. Cultural issues can be touchy, and we're nervous about them, and we don't want to do things in a bad way. We don't want to do things incorrectly. We don't want to offend people. But sometimes what that means is we don't do anything at all. So I think giving ourselves room to grow and to deepen in our understandings is really important.
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll begin with, and we're really going to, in this first characteristic, talk about what Charla brought up, that idea of awareness, which is the starting place. Characteristic 1, sociocultural consciousness. Someone who has the mindset of a culturally responsive educator has an awareness of how sociocultural structures impact individual experiences and opportunities. So this awareness is an awareness that there are 2 things that are specifically mentioned here: social differences and cultural differences. And I would include in that things like economic differences. There are lots of various types of differences, but this is about having an awareness that those differences really impact how an individual processes the experiences that they have, and it impacts the opportunities that they have going into things. I want to give you one example from the educational arena. So sometimes you'll hear, and it's spoken a little bit defensively, oh, I'm colorblind. I see all students the same. I treat them all exactly the same. I am completely colorblind. That comes out of a real specific type of feeling. I really want you to know that I'm not racist. I really want you to know that I'm fair. The problem is, if I truly am colorblind, if I truly do treat all my students exactly the same, I am in denial and operating under a very large lack of awareness that my students are not all the same. They are coming from different backgrounds. They are going home to very different sorts of home experiences. They do all process information differently. They all come to me with different sorts of opportunities available to them. And so treating them all the same means that I'm going to default to treating them the way it comes naturally to me. So if I happen to be, and most of the teachers, probably 95% of our teachers in South Dakota are non-native, probably white. If I'm a white teacher, I'm going to approach my students from a place of that sort of white bias. So to whatever degree a student is more like me, what I do may help them more. But to whatever degree they're coming from a different background than mine, it's probably going to be less effective.
I would say, too, that if you don't notice those differences and you don't bring that out and help your students to share that about themselves, we miss out. We miss out on learning from each other, too. Learning about those backgrounds that maybe are different from our own.
Correct.
And that's a great thing in a classroom to have. You spend a whole year with a group of people that have such differing backgrounds. To not bring that out, you're just really going to miss out.
I think that's one of the things that'll come out as we talk about more of these characteristics, that the richness of the background experiences that are there in our classrooms, if we're not tapping into all of those differing experiences, differing backgrounds, differing stories, then we're really missing out, and all of our students are missing out. So first of all, characteristic one, having that awareness. You may be a teacher. You may be colleagues with teachers. You may be an administrator. Becoming aware of where our level of awareness is. If we're still kind of saying, hey, our goal is just to treat them all the same, well, there's a real problem with that. There's a real problem with that.
The second characteristic is really about high expectations and how we hold those high expectations and high positive and affirming views of all students, no matter their background. When you think about the students that you have in your classroom each year, there are so many differing levels to what their abilities are, how you're able to reach them individually, and being aware of that and knowing that no matter what, I'm going to try to help this child reach their potential, to really excel from wherever they are when they start the year to where you want to get them by the end of the year. And so I think of an example. I'll share one from my classroom. I know I taught elementary for about 11 years in Hill City, and I can remember I would get students that would really struggle with things like writing. And writing is a very complex process because you're not only coming up with something, maybe a story from inside in your brain, but you're also having to get that to go out through these little hands that a lot of times are not fully developed. All of the fine motor isn't there at that elementary level. And so I know I had students sometimes, especially boys occasionally, that really, really struggled to get a story out. And I knew they had them. I knew they had those stories because I'd hear them on the playground and I'd hear them telling their friends about things. And so one of the ways that we'd try to help them get to that high potential is to sit down with them once everybody else was sort of settled and have them tell a story. And I would sit with a computer and I would just type away as fast as I could to try to keep up so that I could get captured what they were sharing down into the computer so they at least had something then. Once I turned that computer around and said, this is what your story looks like. And now you can share it. They had that piece that they could manipulate now and work on things like grammar and spelling and all of the punctuation, things that we want to have done correctly in writing. But they weren't left to having this one barrier that just was preventing them from being able to write. And so that's an example, I think, of what that means to hold all students. We don't just say, well, if you can't do it, then you're failing.
Well, and what that says to me, that's such a good example, because my first thought about holding high expectations or feeling that students can do well is that if they can't do this very exact thing that I'm asking them, then I'm not going to let up on that. At the high school level, quite often said, this is what I'm demanding, and you got to give it to me. Period. And the problem is that sometimes we as educators have to be a little creative. It sounds to me like you saw that there was a whole lot more going on there in this student than could flow through his hand. And so we relaxed the expectation of getting the writing done, the physical writing, so that the higher level thing, all the great imagination, all the great story, all the great communication, all those words, that those could be free to come out. So sometimes having high expectations doesn't look the same for every student.
It's really about what is your ultimate goal?
Yeah.
For me, like writing, I want them to share a story, figure out what does that look like, feel like, am I able to do that, to be able to share something from within me for other people to read?
It's a little bit like a strengths-based approach because you may have one student who they just can't write, but they got all kinds of stories going on. Well, let's start there, and then let's work on the writing and the physical writing out of that.
Right.
You may have a different student who has great fine motor skills. They've got fantastic penmanship, but they think they have no ideas. I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. Well, let's start with the physical writing, and let's use that as a start. You're so good. Your penmanship is so great. I know you've got some great ideas, and then you work on that.
I really like the point you bring up, Scott, about starting with their strength, because it is just a starting point. It does not mean I'm going to just, not have this child work on all of these other things that they need to continue to work on. It's just that where you start can make a big difference, and it can increase their motivation. If they suddenly see, I've got a 5-paragraph story, oh my gosh, that's from me, and that can be the motivation they need then to get it finished up and created into something. I know many of my students were so excited to be able to show those stories and show this came from me.
Right. I think this is also where that cultural piece comes back in, because to whatever degree my student or a student is coming from a differing background from my own, culturally, whatever it is, it may be harder for me to see the strengths that are there, because I might not recognize them right off the bat. Because I mean, that's where I come into contact with my own bias. I may not see something as a strength that really is a strength. And that's why I've got to be humble and working on that to see, what? I didn't see that, but he is really good, or she is really great at this. And I was kind of writing that off. So, yeah. We'll move on to characteristic number 3, a desire to make a difference. These culturally responsive educators see themselves as change agents working toward more equity. And we're going to talk about equity here in just a moment, and maybe the difference between equity and equality, because they're not exactly the same thing. But I think what's really, really important is that I see myself as a change agent. In other words, I'm not just saying, well, it's really sad that we don't have equity, or it's really sad that things aren't, that this student doesn't have everything they need. I'm going to become personally responsible for making sure that I work toward equity, making sure that all of these students have the things that they need to accomplish what they need to accomplish and to excel, both in my own classroom and in our school, in our community. Maybe it's teachers becoming active in their community to say, hey, we've got a lot of students who are not getting their meals. They're not getting sleep. They're not, there's lots of instability here. How do we figure out how to make sure that they're getting the things that they need to be able to come to school and learn?
So important.
Yeah. Charlotte's going to take us down into a little bit deeper look at what equity is.
So we have a picture that I'm guessing many of you may have seen something like this, or something, maybe a baseball field or a soccer field where people were trying to watch. There's a variety of images. This is the one that we've chosen that isn't perfect, but it's getting us to think about the differences through these images. And when we think about equality versus equity, I feel like as an educator, it's very important for me to understand the difference between the two. You know, when we look at the left side of the picture of equality, you know, we have these people and they're all sort of striving for this same goal. They need maybe food, let's say, and they're reaching for an apple. And as they're each reaching, of course, each of the people are different and have different factors that come into their ability to reach their goal. And when you look at the support they're each given, the box that they're each standing on, for example, they each have the exact same thing, the exact same resources that were given to them. And that's what equality looks like. When we're giving every child the exact same thing, it is equal. But you notice in that picture that not every child is fully succeeding in achieving the goal they've set out for. And so that's where our issue comes in. And that's where we look at, on the right side of the picture, this idea behind equity. We can see that suddenly, when given the proper resources, exactly what they need, each of the people within the image are able to achieve their goal, to reach that apple. And so as they are receiving their supports, you know, it looks a little bit different for each one. Yeah. And maybe, you know, the first one on the left, he or she might have been able to reach that apple even without that support. And so when we think about that, that's really where equity lies. Making sure that every child has exactly what they need to succeed. And what are the things that are in our power in the school? You know, some things are completely out of our hands. There are things around home life and just experiences of where our students come from that we really can't change. But if there are things in our schools, in our systems, that we can change, that will allow every child to succeed to that full potential, it's so important that we look at that and make the changes so that every child, that's our goal. We want every child to achieve to their full potential and to achieve those goals that they set for themselves and that teachers help them to set.
And I'll say it's complex because, you know, this example visually is just one task, reaching an apple. And so obviously certain individuals have more challenges toward reaching that apple than others. If we change the task, if it was reaching something that was down low or doing something that required speed or doing something that required stamina or something, then everything would be different. These individuals that can't reach up real high might have more stamina in a different task. And so it's really a matter of as an educator looking at what's the task we're working at and what supports does this student need for this task? Where do we start with this student differently than we start with some other student?
Right. There's a definition that Scott and I have been using for a while now for equity, and I really appreciate this particular definition because I think it sums up what we are trying to say around the issue. And so the statement, equity exists when race and income are no longer the most reliable predictors of student success. Race and income. That's huge. You know, to boil it down to that, when I think about the students that I've had over the years that struggled more than others, there was usually an issue around race or income. It is present when systems work to ensure that each student receives what they need when they need it in order to develop to their full academic and social potential. Yeah. And that word potential is huge. That's where we want every child to be, that they are reaching that full potential, that there aren't things that are within our control to change that could greatly impact their ability to achieve it. I
also appreciate this quote in that it combines academic and social potential. You know, and I know we have a growing awareness of the importance of social emotional learning, but you know, to separate out academics from the social emotional part is just to miss the boat because they really are so tied together, especially when we're talking about things that have to do with culture and difference. So with that in mind, we're going to take a look at characteristic number 4. If you're an educator or have worked in that field, then you know about constructivism. We've been teaching our teachers about constructivism for 20 to 30 years now. But I want to give just a real brief definition, because characteristic 4 has to do with a constructivist approach. These educators understand that learners construct their own knowledge. Now, constructivism says that learning happens in a real specific way. I bring with me the things that I've already learned, the experiences I've had, the stories I've learned, all the successes, and even some of the failures that I've had. And I encounter something new, and I take that new thing. I see how it connects with these other things that I've already learned or experienced, and I construct a new and meaningful understanding. And that's what learning looks like. So it involves these elements, this new thing, but also all the old things that I've already learned. Okay? For many years, we used to think that learning was kind of like a pitcher that you fill up with water, and we just know it's not like that anymore. That's a passive model. We're actively constructing. So Charlotte and I do a lot of modeling in some classrooms, helping quite often teachers who are maybe less than comfortable or unsure about incorporating essential understandings into their lessons. We kind of model it. We don't model perfection, I don't think. No, we kind of say, here's a way to do this, and we can kind of do it. So maybe you can too, to build that confidence. We were in a classroom. And this classroom was about 75% Dakota students and about 25% non-native students, mostly white. And we were doing a lesson about families. And specifically, we wanted to introduce some of the terminology, Lakota and Dakota terminology for family members. But we wanted to kind of ease into it, not just give them a list of words. So we started by asking questions. So what do you call your family members? And we got aunt and uncle and mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, a cousin, brother, sister, all of those things. Mostly, and I think probably because we weren't their everyday teachers, and we are a couple of non-native folks coming into a classroom, mostly coming from the non-native students. They were doing a lot of the talking. So we kind of pushed it just a little bit, and Charlotte said, I know some people who have a Oma and an Opa. And I said, my family, we came from the South, and I called my grandparents Mama and Papa. And so there was a little giggling, but still the words we were hoping for weren't coming out. So I said, does anyone in the room have an Unchi? Well, suddenly there was just all kinds of energy in the room, and hands went up, and lots of people were saying, "Oh yeah, I've got unchi and la la and ate and all these terms, these Dakota and Lakota terms were coming out. The native students were engaged, the non-native students were still engaged, and they were hearing some new terms that they hadn't come across, and everybody was excited, and everybody felt like they were part of the conversation, and we went on with the lesson. Later, when we were conferencing with the teachers, and we usually say, okay, so these are your students. You work with them all the time. What did you notice? Were there any surprises? And they said, you know what? We hadn't realized that apparently there is an unwritten, unintended rule that if you are native, if you're Dakota, you leave that at home. They said, we didn't ever intend that, but clearly the native students felt like what you were asking about was not the stuff that they said at home. It was something else. So we asked some elders in the community, and they said, oh yeah, well, for a number of even decades, that school is the school you go to if you want to become assimilated. That's where you go to learn to be white. That's been the attitude. That's been the history. That's what's there. So here's how that fits into this idea of constructivism. In our state and in every state in our United States, there is an achievement gap between white students who achieve here and then other minority students who achieve at different levels, Black, Hispanic. Native American students, there's a huge achievement gap that for a lot of things that we've tried has not closed. Well, why is that achievement gap there? If I'm a Dakota student in a classroom, coming into contact with new information, and I'm working under the assumption that all my stuff, all the things I call my family, the stories that we do, that's not what we're doing here. I leave that at home. I don't get to bring that in. That's not what this is about. This is about something else. I'm deprived of most of my construction materials. I can't construct new learning when I can't tap into the things I already know. The language pieces that I already have, the experiences, the stories that are mine. If I think those are not welcomed here, I can't construct new learning the way other students might in the same classroom with the same teacher. Now, none of those teachers intended that.
No.
No one in the school intended that. But it was the reality, and they weren't fully aware of it.
And once they became aware of it, there were great strides to try to change some of that. And one of the things was bringing in the essential understandings more, using that in their day-to-day work.
And I think also they realized they had some work in the community to do. Mm-hmm. If that's the sense of things in the community, that you go there, if you go there, you're going to sacrifice being Dakota to learn. If that's the attitude, that's something that the school has to undermine. The school has to communicate, no, you are you. You bring your full self. You are fully Dakota, and you can learn everything. And you know what? You'll learn better when you know you have the right to be fully who you are when you come into the learning space. And so, there's a lot of work to be done in the classroom and even outside of the classroom in the community. So we'll move on to the next characteristic.
This next one is number 5, is deep knowledge of their students. And I feel like this is a place where elementary teachers maybe have a little bit of an advantage because they just don't have as many students. But it's, really about knowing your students, knowing the lives that they live, what their home lives are like, to as much as you can, to be able to serve them better in the classroom. And, when I think about this, when you are a high school, middle school teacher who has more than 100 students in your day that you work with, it's really hard to have that personal relationship with every child, every student. But there are things we can do. There are things that, if you're in that secondary area, just going and showing up places where students discover that you care about them outside of the classroom.
Sports, games.
Sporting events, theater events, band, music, all of those things that students are involved in beyond the classroom where they can shine and show those strengths that they have. I think that's one of the ways that you can really connect in with those families. When they see you there, it's a big deal. Especially I taught elementary, like I said, and when I would show up at a basketball game, they literally would be like, they couldn't believe I was out of the classroom, or in the grocery store.
Yeah.
What? You buy groceries?
Teachers eat? What?
So taking time to really connect with them outside of the classroom is really important. I will share a quick story about a student where it helped me realize the importance of knowing their home life and their situation that they're growing up in. We had in the fall, we did fire prevention sometimes, and one of the things we would try to do is bring firefighters into the classroom so that the students, these young students, would be able to see what they look like, what they sound like. They have the oxygen tanks and things that make sounds. And the firefighters would come in and talk about fire safety and prevention with the students. And then one of the things we'd have them do is they were always wanting to crawl through the students, because that's what it would look like in a house. If you were in a house that was on fire, we were going to be low to the ground, crawling through, trying to find you. And one of their messages was, just don't worry, we will get there. We will find you. We'll go to your bedroom. We will find you and make sure we get you out. And so we had the presentation as usual, and usually the kids are very, very interested in it. And we finished that presentation, and I noticed one of my boys was really upset, like he was crying. And I went over and I was worried that maybe he had experienced a fire or it was triggering to him for some reason, which it was, but I had no idea why. And so I sat down with him. I said, "Are you okay? What's going on?" And I said, "Have you had an experience with a fire before?" And he said, "No, but how are they going to find me? I don't have a bedroom. I don't have a bed. I just sleep wherever I have space. They're not going to find me." And suddenly, in that one little exchange, I knew a whole lot more about what was going on in this kiddo's life and what might be a barrier. He was tired some days, and I think part of the reason was he just didn't have space. He didn't have comfort at home to really relax and be able to rest well. And so it helped me. And it's not that you suddenly give them a pass on everything. It's not that. It's that you have more understanding for what they're going through, and that when things are upsetting or something happens that they seem a little triggered, you have the compassion and the empathy to be able to deal with that situation in a way that's fair and equitable. And so that was a big reminder. There's tons of stories like that. Teachers have those stories where you find out things about families. I mean, that's part of what we do as we get to know the students. But it's just so important that we have that background as much as we can.
Well, it's amazing what connections you might discover just because you're paying attention to that. Because I need to pay attention to who they are, to their family, to what's going on, because I may get some answers to some things I've been struggling with to help this student learn.
Right.
So we'll take a look at the last characteristic, number 6, culturally responsive teaching practices. These educators design and build instruction on students' prior knowledge in order to stretch students in their thinking and learning. We're going to take a look at just a segment of the research for this, because these culturally responsive teaching practices really kind of gravitate around a few particular concepts. And when we do this training in schools with teachers, we have them engage and think. This is the place where we say, hey, let's think about my school. We're going to think about my school, my district, my classroom, and begin to make some connections that are real specific. So coming from this research, holding high expectations for learning while recognizing and honoring the strengths that a student's lived experiences and or home culture bring to the learning environment of the classroom. Whenever we practice these approaches, we've talked about this before, holding those high expectations, but also doing everything we can to give honor to a student's lived experience and home culture. That's really important, especially in our region. We have a history, a really specific history in our country and especially in our region of the boarding school experiences. If you're familiar at all with our history and our history of the U.S. education system in relationship to the indigenous people of our area, you know that beginning in the 1800s with Pratt, we had this practice. It was a very specific practice of assimilating Native children. They were taken out of their homes, taken into boarding schools, and Pratt's, in a sentence, Pratt's philosophy was this: kill the Indian to save the man. So the whole goal was to strip away all that is native, all that is indigenous, cut their hair, change their clothes, outlaw the language, don't allow any of the spiritual practices.
Don't let them see their family.
Don't let them see their family. To cut them off from their culture, their language, their whole identity in order to teach them. And so if you look at this equation, Pratt's equation was this. The problem is the home. The solution is the school. In a really harsh way, that's what his solution was. Culturally responsive teaching practices flip that completely. If we are to have rich, valuable, productive learning in our schools, the source of so much of that learning for every individual student and for the other students is all the richness that they're bringing from home, from their lived experiences, from the things they know already. That's that constructivism at work. We know that you're bringing all kinds of experiences and stories and connections. Bring those. That's important for you to learn, and it's important for all the rest of us to learn, because we may not be coming from where you're coming from, and that's new stuff for some of us. And so culturally responsive teaching practices, first and foremost, say all the richness for the learning is coming from those lived experiences and those home cultures. The other piece of this is the next part that's underlined. This enables students to see themselves in their daily learning in the classroom. And it sends a message to students and to the community that student-parent community knowledge and experiences not only have value, but they are also important to the learning in the school. If a student doesn't see himself or herself in the school, in the curriculum, in the stories, in what's happening, the learning doesn't happen. If I feel like I'm out of place, I don't have a spot here, what I am, who I am, what I bring is unimportant, I can't learn in that environment. And this is not just a cultural or racial piece. This is not just about my heritage. This is about all kinds of things. My own personality, who I am, my body type, my gender, the things I'm interested in. If I don't see a place for me in the learning, it's really hard for me to learn. This also communicates really a vital message to the community. We were talking about that other school situation where the community assumed, well, this school's all about assimilation. It's about giving up your heritage and who you are. We've got to do the things that communicate to our communities. No, you are the place where all the richness is coming from. We need your knowledge. We need your input. We need to know, we need our students to know that where they come from is incredibly important. So with that in mind, we, and this is an activity that we do with educators, we drew some questions for conversations out of this little piece of research. And we're going to read through these questions. I'll take one, then you can take the other. And what we'd invite you to do, we're not going to take the time, if we were doing this with teachers, we'd probably take about 20 minutes or so for them to have some small group discussions. What we'd like to do in this setting is just to give you these questions to think about and maybe take back to your school, to where you're at. There are things to consider to make specific connections with your particular environment, your particular community, and see where you stand with these. So, number one, what categories of learners might my school community tend to expect less from? If we become aware that, there's this whole category of students where we say, oh, well, she's just one of so probably that's about the best we can expect. If we're doing that, we're not having those high expectations. We need to become aware of it, and then we need to say, hey, how do we change that?
The second one, what lived experiences or home cultures might my school community tend to see as barriers to learning rather than strengths? So that's just, that again is knowing your communities, knowing the home lives that your students have, and being aware of, so where are some times that maybe I could have that parent come in and help with something, or speak to the class, or this grandparent who might want to come in and share a little bit about it. And it might be something that, we've thought in the past, that would be a struggle for students. For example, speaking another language in the home. That was something I dealt with a lot with in my particular situation, because we had such a large Spanish-speaking population. And it's just really important that, bringing those family members in and having them share in their language, maybe having the student translate. That was huge.
Yeah.
Big way of, I guess, helping the other students to realize how much those students know. They not only know what we're learning in English, they also have another whole language that their brain thinks in.
Yeah.
So.
The next question, what learners or groups of learners might have difficulty seeing themselves within my school's curriculum or learning environment? And it's really hard for us to be aware of this if our learning environment and our curriculum kind of fits me. I know when I first started teaching, I was a super excited English teacher, and I knew all the things that I was excited about and the things that I had read that excited me and the types of things I wanted to write that excited me as a student. And my first teaching assignment was in a school that was 60% Black and about 40% Latinx, Hispanic students. And you know what? The things that they were excited about were different than the things that I was excited about. And as long as I stubbornly stuck to having my whole environment in my classroom and my curriculum reflect everything about me and nothing about them, they were left out in the cold. They couldn't see themselves. They couldn't see themselves in that. Mm-hmm. So.
And then the last one is, what parent or community knowledge and experiences have been valued less as key elements for the learning of all students? So just making sure that when we think about what is most important for our students to be learning in the classroom and from the people in the community, that they're valued the same. That we see as much value in learning about this particular culture that represents a large portion of our community as any other.
Right. Well, with those things in mind, what we'd like to talk about are the other two pieces of this holistic approach. This is really, really important. This is our way of being. These other two really have to do with some really specific things, specific to our region, specific to our state, that are, I hate to just call them tools. They are tools, but they're so much more than that for helping us to do this work with our specific population. So the first section we're going to talk about is unity. And the reason we're calling it unity is that there is this wonderful unity of ideology. We have 3 states. We live in South Dakota. We also do a great deal of work in North Dakota, and we've done some work as well in Montana. The indigenous elders of all 3 of these states have come together, not all together, but state by state, and identified essential understandings to be incorporated into the education of all students, native or non-native. When you look at these 3 sets of essential understandings, each one has about 7. Each one represents elders coming from different nations within each state and coming together, having conversations, telling stories, coming into rich agreement on the things that are really important for their students, their children and their grandchildren to know about themselves, and for everyone else in the state to know about them. The unity in that vision is just remarkable across each individual state, but even across all 3 states. We did a little bit of work a few years ago to kind of align all 3 of these sets of essential understandings. And what we tried to do is identify the key themes that came up. And these were the big themes that elders in each of these 3 states said, this is something that really, our perspective on this really needs to be clear, made clear, because it's not clear right now. And these were some of the main themes that came up, and how many times they came up, kind of ordered in that way. The importance of tribal sovereignty and treaties and the U.S. legal system and policy. Not that those things aren't ever taught, but are they taught from that indigenous perspective? Or are we just looking at it from a very white or a government perspective? Traditional culture and values, language, those things. Individual identity and variety. In each of these sets, the statement that there is no generic American Indian or no generic Native American, that misunderstanding that prevails has for a long time in our society, comes from Hollywood. That we just mush all these cultures and these languages and nations together as one thing. Recognizing that variety is so incredibly important. Talk about their interrelationship with the land, the importance of storytelling and oral tradition, the resiliency of the people, group cohesion through generosity and kinship systems and humor, societal contributions, being aware of what Native individuals have contributed to our society, both their tribal society but also the larger society. And then elements of their spirituality, which is not about tearing down the separation between church and state, but understanding that there's a spiritual element in all pieces of culture, an element of understanding that there's something higher and bigger than just me, just the individual, that it's bigger than that. So those are some of the things that have unified this vision across all three states. And when you have that structure of those essential understandings, then you have a place to start for incorporating those into lessons. A teacher will have a set of standards and a set of essential understandings. Being able to design a lesson that connects specifically with both of those is so valuable for planning. So we're going to talk about diversity.
So as we move into diversity, one of the things that we learned from the very beginning is the importance of that particular essential understanding you addressed, the part of it where it says there is no generic American Indian. So when you think about the diversity of the tribes in our region, it is so important to have all of those perspectives, or as many of them as we can access. And so one of the things that we have done to support that idea of promoting the diversity within the region is to make sure that we're hearing from as many people from as many different places as possible. So we've gone and interviewed elders all throughout the region and collected those interviews and put them on a website, which we'll address a little bit later. But we've got over 700 now individual clips of elders speaking about their culture and language and addressing all the things that they think are most important for their children and grandchildren and their neighbors to know about them. And so we feel like this is the treasure, I guess you could say, of this work. Many of the elders have passed on since we've had the opportunity to interview them. And one of the things that I love about that is that their voice, their wisdom still lives on within those interviews. And so being able to hear directly from an elder from a certain nation speak about a topic, a piece of content, or a way of being with one another is invaluable. It's something that we want to promote as much as we can, get as many of these elders' voices out into classrooms around our region as we can.
And, having a video clip from an elder is wonderful. It's not a substitute for having an elder come to your classroom, and we don't ever want to communicate that. It's so important for our students to hear from elders. But the reality is, for many teachers, it may be very difficult, and they may not be able to get an elder as often as they would like. And so you have this set of video clips of elders speaking. And the nice thing about that is you can say, this elder is from Rosebud. Mm-hmm. This elder is from Standing Rock. And you can make sure that we as teachers and our students are aware that these individuals come from different tribes and they also have their own individual perspectives that are so rich.
You know, one of our elders that we interviewed, whose picture is here actually, Jace DeCory, she shared something one time that was just so eye-opening for me. And she said, you know, I get students that come into my class every year in the fall. She taught at BH. And they say, well, my grandmother says this about something. And, well, my grandmother says this. Which one's right? And her comment back to them was, well, that's Oceti thinking, meaning that there has to be a right and a wrong. We can't have both of them held up equally. And when we think of things from the perspective of the native people, the indigenous people from this place, there's really something about truth being within all of it.
Yeah.
You know, that as every perspective is heard and respected, then there's truth that lies within all of that.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated that.
Recognizing the richness of multiple perspectives, and that's something that we value in our content standards, you know, being able to be aware of multiple perspectives and being able to navigate that in our own reading, in our own writing, in our own communication, that there's more than one way to look at it. So.
Yes.
So what we'd like to really drive home is that with our educators, what we're trying to do is not change the job that they do. They're hired to teach a specific grade level. They're hired to teach certain content areas. They're hired to teach specific things. And that's still at the very center of what they're doing. But when you triangulate around that with these culturally responsive practices, and aligning to the essential understandings. In our state, the Oceti Sakowin essential understandings. And then having the voices and faces of indigenous elders to bring into lessons, to bring in those rich voices and stories into the learning, then what you have is you have better learning of the content, whether it's a science class, a math class, an English class, an art class, a music class, whatever it is, better learning of the content that's more responsive to every student, and this growing awareness of the indigenous people, the indigenous culture of our state, South Dakota, which is just so incredibly rich.
So we have gathered all of the resources to help support this and help teachers in their efforts to do this on a website. And we would gladly, you know, if you ever need a little instruction about what's there, or you want us to come and speak to your teachers or students about this, we'd be happy to do that. But for right now, we'll share what the website is and encourage you to go there. The wolakotaproject.org website is where all of the interviews are housed, all of the lessons that have been developed by South Dakota educators and North Dakota educators on the North Dakota site, Teachings of Our Elders, are all available online for anyone to access. And it is a wealth of wonderful information, wisdom, resources for teachers to use.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope that this has been helpful. And like Charlotte said, we would love, we both work at TIE, TIE.net. And you can find us, look for our little faces on the staff page. And we'd be happy to answer any questions or be as helpful as we possibly can, either if we can come to your school or by phone or email as well.
Thank you for your interest, and we look forward to maybe hearing from you in the future.
Thank you so much.